Good afternoon, everyone. We would like to welcome you to the ASEAN Studies Lecture Series. We also would like to welcome those who are watching via web stream in the lecture series, which is held in celebration of the ASEAN Week. We invite scholars and subject matter specialists to share with us their scholarship and expertise to enrich our understanding of what ASEAN is and who we are as a community. The past lectures include ASEAN in the Meta-Nation State Interface Dynamics by the late Dr. Mahiwo of UP Diliman, Colonization and Decolonization of Southeast Asia by Dr. Azahar Madras of the Open University of Malaysia, Third, ASEAN Open Regionalism by Dr. Lawan Tanad Sila Pakul of Sukhothai Thammasat Open University of Thailand. The fourth one is Opportunities and Challenges of Economic Globalization to ASEAN by Dr. Nguyen Thi Tu Hung of Hanoi Open University in Vietnam. The fifth one is ASEAN in Southeast Asia, a cultural region by Dr. Jofe Santarita of UP Diliman. And the last one was Food as Cultural Domain by Prof. Joyce Alegre of UP Visayas. To give us a fitting welcome and to introduce our speaker this afternoon's lecture, may I call on the Dean of the Faculty of Management and Development Studies, Dr. Primo Garcia.
Dr. Gisela Concepcion, Dr. Jean Saludades, UPOU faculty and staff, and our online viewers. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the ASEAN Studies Lecture Series. As we all know, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, was established on the 8th of August 1967 in Bangkok, Thailand, with the signing of the ASEAN Declaration, Bangkok Declaration, by the founding fathers of ASEAN, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand. The UP Open University Faculty of Management and Development Studies, through its ASEAN Graduate Studies program, hopes to promote regional and global understanding about ASEAN countries from the perspective of ASEAN, increase the ASEAN community's consciousness of its common historical, cultural, and regional identity, and obtain a balanced perspective in ASEAN studies. Today, in commemoration of the 52nd anniversary of the founding of the ASEAN, the university joins the celebration of this milestone through the ASEAN Studies Lecture Series. Science, technology, and innovations have been considered as important key elements in driving economic growth, enhancing community well-being, and promoting integration in the ASEAN region. Thus, it is important to promote greater awareness of the S&T activities and its roles and contributions towards sustainable economic development and provide ways and means to innovate. The involvement of specific elements in ASEAN communities such as private sector in S&T undertakings, especially in research and technology management and development and commercialization of technologies must also be promoted. In 1978, the Committee on Science and Technology, or COST, was formed to develop the ASEAN Plan of Actions on Science, Technology, and Innovation, implementing programs and activities to achieve better coordination and cooperation to strengthen the capabilities of S&T in ASEAN. We are privileged to have with us today Dr. Gisela Concepcion, Professor and Academician of the National Academy of Science and Technology, to give us a lecture on the ASEAN Synergistic Growth through Science and Technology. Muli, maraming po salamat sa inyo lahat.
Good afternoon. Thank you for that kind introduction, Dean Primo Garcia. Thank you, Chancellor Jean Saludades, Vice Chancellor Jean Saludades, and our dear Chancellor Mel Vandalaria for organizing this commemorative lecture series of ASEAN Week. So today, I will tell you about ASEAN opportunities to grow through science and technology. And I call that growth opportunity synergistic. And I'd like to say that I came from UP Diliman, and with inclement weather, classes were suspended. Ano ba to? But in UP Open University, open education is synergy through enabling ICT, and that's an S&T. Okay, and does it work? Does S&T work? It does. As I said, in UP Diliman, classes are suspended. Okay, but here in UPOU, classes go on, and as long as ICT, which is S&T for cyber connectivity, works, teaching and learning online in virtual but real time works. The flow of knowledge in multiple directions without limit quickens to our enlightenment and wisdom, to what I call a eureka moment, a creative or realization point that we all aim for in education. Enough so that my student Mara in the ASEAN Studies program, ASEAN Science and Technology, working as a full-time faculty member in a state university in Mindanao, a UP Mindanao architecture graduate, Miss Mara, and my student Christelle, working full-time as a faculty member in Pisay, Baguio, Philippine Science High School in Baguio, a UP Baguio graduate, infused me with their on-the-ground experiences in the workplace as I perfused them with what I call universitas thinking, broad, open-minded, philosophical, borderless, out-of-the-box, innovative thinking. And for what purpose? To help solve problems in their particular community. So, okay. I'd like to show the first 3 slides. I did that. Ayaw. Okay. Sorry. So, this is our module, which is an ASEAN Science Expert Human Capital Development under Unit 1, Science, Individuals, and Society. And here we have our learning objectives, proposed mechanisms to promote joint training, exchange of ideas, cooperation, collaboration among scientists in ASEAN, understand the nature of inter and transdisciplinary research across scientific disciplines and non-scientific disciplines, identify the elements, agents, processes required to create a value chain or hubs and spokes network leading to the creation of STI ecosystems. And then Here is a study guide and some references, and the result, I'd say constructive. So Crystal proposed an education campaign and LGU action-led Baguio City waste management program, okay, for plastics recycling. And she based it on a success story in the leading member state, Singapore, okay, which had this plastic recycler. While Mara proposed clean, cool, no traffic, ephemeral, airy surroundings in Cagayan de Oro City to support and grow a healthy, productive workforce. Mara also proposed an innovative home design with a rain catchment roof to save water, inspired by some models in other ASEAN countries. I would say that synergy in education is real here in UPOU, where you enable synergy through education that's open and distant and online, available to all. Okay. Synergy is where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, and the key is organizing or assembling the parts through a structure to function as a whole, and where the whole then develops new properties, new behavior that is strong, robust, and in the face of threats or assaults, this behavior is responsive, adaptive, and resilient. So, right. Key to the strength of the structure are the connections, the interactions, the forces that hold it up. The real added value is the binding, the bonding. Key to the resilience of the structure in the face of assault are the disruption of some forces, the slight adjustments, or even some massive defensive definitive movements made possible by a strong core structure. So, a good example of a synergistic system is a human. It's probably the quintessential product of nature with a robust synergistic organ systems. And we know that the organ systems function for the health, wellness, and life, productive life of the human. And we think in terms of what we ingest as food, what we breathe in the air, okay, what we excrete and what we metabolize, and how all this provides us health of body, of mind, of heart, and spirit. Okay? So I think that that would be a good model for synergy. And when we think of the challenges we face relating to food, nutrition, health, wellness, energy, and environment, we think in terms of what is adequate for the system. Okay, not superfluous, not needy, just sufficient and adequate. Okay. So if we think in those terms, we can then plan our programs for food production and food security. We can plan the quality of our meals. For example, if we knew that rice gives us a high glycemic index, we're going to try to reduce our rice consumption and replace it with other food that would be more nutritious. Okay? And so immediately our demand for rice would decrease. Okay. So another robust synergistic system is the marine coral reefs ecosystem, okay, where we have a balancing of competitive and cooperative interactions among organisms, which leads to successful biochemodiversity. And I'd like to point out the little bug there. So that's a microbe, and even if he's so small, he's so important, as we're finding out in our research. So those microbes, they move around different macroorganisms in the coral reef, and they provide protection, they provide maybe nutrition, and many other functions are performed by these little ones. So small is big. Okay. So what about our ASEAN? ASEAN is our regional home, our ecosystem, our global local home. It is where we live and thrive, because in ASEAN we share nature from where we were born, where we came from. We first share genetics, our lineages. We share waters, where our deepest and richest natural resources lie and flow. And with ephemeral air blowing and pouring over us, we share the typhoons and the rest of climate change. We share seeds, stems, blooms of the land above sea, which we rely on for food, clothing, and shelter. Doesn't want to move. So sorry about this. Yet ASEAN culture is diverse because of our history. From our common nomadic seafaring, hunting, farming, and settling, finally fixed dwelling ancestors, we evolved our communities, our own languages and cultures, our religions and philosophies, our beliefs and practices. To this day, shaping our personal values, our work ethics, deeply rooted in our localities, but also greatly influenced and marked by overpowering conquests, some perilous by foreign cultures. But we leave the past behind with important lessons learned, and looking to the future, we value the diversity in the ASEAN, because in diversity there is strength, in unity, and in synergy. Okay. So that's our ASEAN local home, and we hope that we can find opportunities for synergy through science and technology with other ASEAN member states. So, in the UNESCO Science Report of 2015, and this is the latest report, Singapore stands out. Singapore's share of the region's high-tech exports in 2013 was huge, almost 50%. Okay? So, looks like in the ASEAN we have a leader, and so we would like to learn from our leader, although the conditions in Singapore are very different from conditions in other ASEAN member states. For example, in Singapore, they've led in vertical farming. And why is that? Because they have limited land. and they have a population to feed in the cities. And so the trend nowadays is to be able to grow your healthy food, not the non-healthy food that will be a burden to them in the future because of a disease which costs a lot of money to cure. And so they are into green food, and they're growing this through science and technology in very efficient ways within their cities, in their buildings. Okay, what are the opportunities for synergies at present? Well, as I indicated, UPOU connectivity is the great opportunity for synergy in the ASEAN. Okay? This coupled with Philippines' impressive proficiency of the English language. So, UPOU can make a major impact in higher education and public education or advocacies, not only in the Philippines, but in the whole ASEAN. And I always say that the Philippines has this leadership opportunity in the ASEAN because of this. So you have a great responsibility in the UP Open University. And all this is made possible because of cyber connectivity. That's major S&T. Okay, there's a guy who came from Singapore, and he made a major contribution through A-STAR. His name is Chris Monterola. He is a graduate of the UP Diliman National Institute of Physics, a very outstanding scientist. But this guy was lured with his postdoc Erica Legara to A-STAR, where he managed Smart Cities program of Singapore and contributed significantly to keeping Singapore very, very environment safe. And he also monitored the demographics in Singapore. So Chris is an expert in data science and data analytics. We are lucky to have him back in the Philippines at the ASEAN Institute of Management, which is also supported by the ASEAN. Okay? So Chris could make a difference in the Philippines as well as in the whole ASEAN. And he is committed to doing this, not just for the private sector engaged in enterprise, including multinationals or big Filipino companies, but also by collaborating with the academe. So this is an opportunity for the UPOU to collaborate with a guy who can gather significant data and make sense of it through data analytics. And these are all that we need to do what you call artificial intelligence programs that would benefit us. Okay? An example of how S&T can synergize all our efforts based on data acquisition and management and data interpretation through analytics. Okay. We know that in the country today, there is major initiative to reduce the use of plastics or one-use plastics. We already know many cities in Metro Manila that have this program to avoid packaging made of plastics. Okay? And we've been joined by the government and the National Academy of Science and Technology championed this program 2 years in a row. Okay? Then we have opportunities in food. We have an algae bioengineer who keeps coming to us. This is Dr. Joel Cuello of the University of Arizona. But Dr. Cuello, like a true Filipino ASEAN citizen, keeps moving around this part of the world. And he's in collaboration with many universities, including De La Salle University and University of the Philippines to try to set up a huge algal bioreactor. Okay? Many of us are involved in moringa, which I would consider one of the most nutritious plants. I have a research on moringa, and we know that it's rich in macro and micronutrients. Okay, and I am working on this project with scientists from UP Los Baños. We have seaweeds, we have coconut, and we know that these bioresources are rich sources of nutritious food and other materials. Okay. So I've touched on information technology, environment, food. Now what about health? There is an opportunity for conducting multi-center clinical trials in the ASEAN. It's already happening, and the Philippines is participating in this. And multi-center clinical trials are still led by private companies. Nothing wrong with that, as long as the data that they share or they use is accurate and the analytics are good and serve the general good. Finally, being in the region of highest biodiversity in the world, the ASEAN has the opportunity to develop new drugs, especially from the marine environment, which is largely untapped. And I am directly involved in that kind of work. So this is a little bit of a plug. And this is a compound that we're working on, and it is showing synergy with a clinically used anti-cancer drug, which is doxorubicin. And in cells, in cancer cells, we showed that it's active at lower doses with doxorubicin. Therefore, the toxic side effects are not so great. Okay? So even at the molecular level, you have synergy working. Okay? What's the status of this study? It just got published 2 days ago in Marine Drugs, this international journal. But before that, we already filed an invention disclosure, and it's now a patent application. Okay? And what's happening in the lab? We're doing the in vivo testing, okay, to show proof of concept or proof of principle. So this is another demonstration of how S&T might work or must work to find new drugs for ASEAN. Because the cost of health care, of medical care, of cancer care in our country, in other ASEAN countries, is very prohibitive. And that is because everything that we use is imported from the West. Okay, now, of course, there are some drugs that come from India and other Asian countries, but by and large, for drugs for cancer, the next generation of drugs for cancer, they're still developed in the Western world. Okay. There is another opportunity from our marine megadiversity, particularly from mollusks, and this one is a famous cone snail. Some of you may know about this cone snail that kills people. So it produces, through its venom, neuroactive peptides. But as it turns out now, it produces other stuff as well. And it produces something like insulin, except that it is smaller and it acts faster. So it produces a fast-acting insulin. Can you imagine if we could produce a conoid peptide drug developed by an Asian consortium? I won't say ASEAN consortium, because this kind of work for diabetes, and in this case for pain, for our aging population, as well as the anti-cancer drugs, they need participation probably from the very scientifically advanced countries in Asia, maybe like Taiwan, Japan, Korea, China, okay? But just the same, let you know that for that anti-cancer drug, there is a scientist from Chulalongkorn University in Thailand, Kanitsuan Borirux, that I published the paper with in the journal Marine Drugs. Okay? So now let me move to the next part of this talk, and this is the next phase of what our dean mentioned, which is the work of cost. Okay? ASEAN cost. So we are at the stage where we actually have an ASEAN plan of action on science and technology and innovation, APAST. And this is to run from 2016 to 2025. And I looked over the document, and you can search it freely. It's an implementation plan. And this is the motto: one vision, one identity, one community. And this is the message of the chair. And it just says the AIP, or the implementation plan of APAST, will help various subcommittees of cost to improve the monitoring and evaluating mechanisms of programs and activities. Okay? So, this is the vision: is science, technology, and innovation enacted, enabled ASEAN, which is innovative, competitive, vibrant, sustainable, and economically integrated. Okay? And then you have a set of goals. I think that many of you would agree with these goals. And one highlight is that there should be STI management systems. That's number 6. Okay? So it's not enough just to have the science and technology in place. The social scientists, the management scientists, the political scientists, they should be engaged in the implementation plan. Okay. And here are the strategic thrusts. 1, public-private collaboration. 2, talent mobility, people-to-people connectivity, and inclusiveness. I think this is very important. And our interconnectivity in the UPOU makes this possible. 3, enterprises support. So there needs to be support from the private sector, and it would start with small and medium enterprises. Okay. 4th, public awareness and STI enculturation. So again, this is where the UP Open University would play a pivotal role in the ASEAN, because you could have public awareness programs and advocacies transmitted through the UPOU, and STI enculturation, that's critical. So, as I said earlier, the different ASEAN member states and their localities have different cultures, beliefs, and practices, work ethic, and personal values. Okay? But what's so great about science as a field of knowledge, or as a discipline, as a general discipline, is it's reproducible, it's evidence-based, and therefore verifiable. So if you try to communicate science and the resulting technologies to educated people on the basic, tertiary, and postgraduate levels, then the person who's educated can discern whether the science that is being presented is right and true and good. Okay. Okay. Then the APAST document also presents key performance indicators, both output indicators and outcome indicators, R&D expenditure, human resource involved in R&D, S&T output, talent mobility, knowledge impact, knowledge diffusion, and SDI culture. In other words, this STI, science and technology innovation, has got to be ingrained in the communities, enculturated, okay? Because it will not, you know, be established, it will not bear fruit, even if you plant it on the ground, if you do not try to convince the community about its value. Okay, there are many annexes in the document. So there's one on biotechnology, and these are subcommittees. Biotechnology, food science and technology, S&T, infrastructure and resources development, meteorology and geophysics, microelectronics and information technology, marine science and technology, and I'll pursue this in a while, material science and technology, sustainable energy research, and space technology and application. And for each of these, there is a lot of information, a lot of plans in tables with expected outputs, specific activities and projects, indicators, implementing and cooperating bodies, and a timeline, okay, including the one for marine science and technology. Okay, so at this point, I'll move to the next part of the talk, which is on a proposal that we have prepared, okay, led by me, to establish a UNESCO Center for Marine Biotechnology, Fisheries, and Ocean Sciences in Southeast Asia, okay, UCMB FOSS-SEA, at the Marine Sciences University of the Philippines in Diliman, as a Category 2 Center of Excellence under the auspices of the UNESCO. And this is very recent, and we got good feedback on the draft. So we're going to pursue this. And that's because of our realization that in the ASEAN, okay, we are surrounded by waters that are uncharted or are largely unexplored and could be the source of our food and livelihood. Okay? So the United Nations declared the next decade as a decade of the ocean sciences. So, first of all, this proposal addresses the United Nations 17 global goals, the Sustainability Development Goals, but it takes cognizance in particular of the UN's proclamation of the Decade of the Ocean Sciences for Sustainable Development. I don't know if some of you have read the paper of NAST President Rodora Asanza, co-authored with NEDA Secretary Ernesto Pernia before he became NEDA Secretary, on the blue economy and its valuation of trillions of dollars. Okay? And that is why the NAST continues to advocate for the development of the blue or the marine economy. Okay. This proposal recognizes the Philippines as a center of marine biodiversity in the world as an archipelagic nation with rich coastal and ocean resources. However, while we have rich resources, stark contrasts still exist in Philippine society. While the country has sustained remarkable economic growth in the last 5 years, growth and development are non-inclusive, and poverty, hunger, and poor education persist in rural areas, especially in marine coastal communities. Clearly, challenges and opportunities exist to increase productivity, reduce hunger, and provide better livelihood in these communities through marine biotechnology. So what we're saying here is, while the Philippines is in this situation, so are the other ASEAN countries. Okay? But I think we are more challenged because we have less arable terrestrial land than Thailand or Vietnam. Okay? We have more coastal resources than they. Okay? We cannot plant and harvest as much rice as those two countries. So question is, are we going to be permanent or long-term importers of rice? Or are we going to look for other sources of nutrition? Are we going to educate our communities to consume less rice? Because anyway, it's not very, very healthy. Okay. Okay. So the first line of engagement in this proposal, okay, for the center would be training workshop. So this is something that I envisioned perhaps in collaboration with the UPOU, but it will be implemented principally by the MSI researchers and faculty in collaboration with foreign experts, including those from the ASEAN. Okay. But for us to have a multiplier effect, can you imagine that this would do well in courses through the UPOU, and some of them would be short-term, and some of them would be medium-term courses. The paradigm for education these days is actually changing. It's shifting from the regular, full-term courses to the ones that are shorter term and provide the students the necessary skills, okay? The hands-on training for certain skills that are required for areas of development like agriculture, fisheries, aquaculture, etc. Okay? We are not lacking in the theoretical knowledge precisely because of science and technology, precisely because we know where to look for the information. We only read articles that are peer-reviewed or are found in reliable links or websites. We do not believe what we read from commercial, conflict-ridden sites. I think we know what this means, right? But on the other hand, many times, we think we know how to do things. We think we can perform experiments, but we don't. We don't even know how to use instruments correctly. So we are going on this mode in MSI to provide lab-based, field-based, even shipboard-based training to our local marine scientists, managers, administrators, as well as those in the ASEAN. Okay? And the idea here is not to stop at training, but to build STI marine ecosystems. Okay? That would be inclusive. We would think of some sites that Marine Science Institute already has that is showing moderate success. And we would then be able to share our experiences and our expertise with ASEAN scientists who could then manage their own sites. Okay. I think that many of us recognize that tourism is an important area of development. And in the Philippines, it's not very consistent, okay? It's still quite anemic compared to Thailand or other ASEAN countries, including Vietnam, okay? But we might find a niche for tourism as long as we improve our services. We could focus on marine ecotourism, for example, and one such example is this research program funded by the EIDR, which has now already attracted private foundation partners, an eco-resilience group from France. This is the One Ecosystem Bridge to Reef to Community program in Abra de Ilog Occidental Mindoro, okay, led by Dr. Helen Yap of MSI. Okay? And this is in the Verde Island Passage. You can imagine the marine biodiversity in this area. And what's interesting is that this area has a Mangyan indigenous tribe community to care for. So the researchers, S&T is able to analyze the situation in Abra de Ilog through a livelihood complexity network. So Dr. Yap is working with complexity scientists at the National Institute of Physics. she's also working with scientists from community development, and I believe it's from SERP in UP Diliman. Okay. Okay. So those are examples of opportunities for synergy through S&T. Now let's take a closer look at what the university is involved in with the United Nations. And the organization in particular is UNISTAR, whose executive director is Dr. Edna Ko, former dean of NCPAG and former vice president for public affairs and former executive director of the Center for Integrative Development Studies. So CIFAL is into the analysis of the SDGs. So many of you are familiar with the United Nations SDGs, okay? And they're presented this way. So it's just like an enumeration of the SDGs. And you always try to figure out, when I do this project, am I addressing this or several SDGs? And are they synergistic or not? And of course they are synergistic. The SDGs replace the MDGs and cover all dimensions of sustainable development. They are universal goals that apply to every nation. Okay. And they will run from 2016 to 2030. The thing is, Dr. Ko's group has made an analysis to show that several SDGs can be addressed at the same time. So this is again a case of synergy. The approach is synergistic. Okay, so UNISTAR CIFAL is focused on policy integration. Okay, and some of the problems being addressed by UNISTAR would be labor migration. And why is this so important for us, for the ASEAN? Within the ASEAN, we have intermigration, and we know that we are a net exporter of labor to the ASEAN. That may be good for them and not so good for us. Okay? And it highlights the importance of, first and foremost, improving our education in the country, from the basic to the tertiary to the postgraduate education. Okay. So what is policy integration? It's policy making processes that take into account interdependencies between dimensions and sectors, successful management of trade-offs between conflicting policies and synergies between mutually supportive policies. So we think that the political scientists, the governance experts must weigh in on whatever S&T or knowledge-driven programs we embark on. Okay? Well, naturally, within the ASEAN, within any system, ecosystem, as we said, we have to balance or trade off through competition and cooperation. Even in the human body, we have our organ systems cooperating, but also oftentimes competing for resources. Okay. So, CIFAL has identified competing priorities, but also missing links. Okay. And SDGs are both sectoral and cross-sectoral. Okay? So when you say cross-sectoral, that's again cooperative, that's again synergistic in nature. Okay? Aiming for synergism and not antagonism. Okay? Okay? So the analysis is gone, so they have a working paper, and here you show that the SDGs are actually a network of targets. And as a network of targets, over one half of the SDG targets make explicit reference to at least another goal. So this may facilitate cross-sector integration of policy thinking and implementation. So it's quite easy for us, including our students, to realize this, that if you care for the environment, you're caring for your health. Okay? And you are contributing, perhaps, with proper education to increasing the number of persons in the productive workforce. Okay. So, example one, ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Target 12.4, by 2020, achieve environmentally sound management of chemicals and all wastes. Okay, so these are examples. Another would be health. Okay, so you have many players for health, the aim being universal health. Okay. So CIFAL also recognizes the tensions, okay, present among the SDG goal areas. Okay. For example, many of you know that when you try to attain food security, you might be compromising sources of alternative energy. So that's like a classic example, okay, of corn as a source of food for livestock versus corn as a source of bioethanol or green energy, biofuels. But the bigger question being addressed by CFAL, and they're kind of right on the dot for this, right on top of this, because they're trying to address labor and migration, would be how to finance projects for sustainable development. Right? Where are we going to get the money? Of course, we always rely on the government. The public sector is the linchpin. So this is Dr. Edna Ko telling us this. But the private sector resources will also be required. Okay? And if you try to estimate how much it will cost to attain the SDGs annually, it's a very formidable amount of trillions, in the trillions. Okay? So, in the context of labor and migration, I think Dr. Edna Ko and I share this idea strongly. Possibly, the government could set up policy where the savings from the private sector earned through remittances, okay, would be used for public good, for economic development in their communities. So that would be perhaps designed by our policymakers, just so the savings of our OFWs, our exported heroines, will not just be used for consumer goods, which are mostly imported anyway. Okay, so this kind of revenues, the GDP that we are registering, they actually fall in the hands of the traders. Okay, so the established businesses. And this does not redound to inclusive growth or to upliftment from poverty and hunger. Okay. I'm going to go now to the next part of this talk, and I will focus on what I consider a major opportunity for ASEAN competitiveness. Still arguing that we are the center of biodiversity in the world, in the tropics. So bio-innovations as ASEAN competitiveness. And many of you are in this area of research in UP Los Baños, where bio-innovation refers to the development and production of high-value products, services, processes, and systems using biotechnology, bioengineering, bioinformatics, and other bioprocessing methods. The source materials are biological materials from microorganisms, macroorganisms like plants, animals, and humans, and information on these materials. Okay. Okay, with a qualification on the humans. So that has to be explained further. But for now, let's just look at some industrial biotechnology production platforms from yeast and bacteria, algae and cyanobacteria, enzymes in vivo and in vitro plant cells, filamentous fungi. So those of us who are in the finance and management disciplines, we believe should synergize, link up with our natural scientists, those who are doing research on our bioresources. Come up with a business plan. Come up with a way to make the development of the bioresource valuable and sustainable, profitable and sustainable. So again, it is what we call creating a value chain or a value network. Again, it's a principle of that is embedded in synergy. So that's a simple way of doing it, presenting it. And we have again our expert, Joel Coelho, as early as 2005. He's already coming here and making the rounds in other countries of the world. He is an expert on bioengineering. This is optimization of the performance of a task or set of tasks performed by a biological system through the application of the engineering design process. And there are many, many areas of application of bioengineering. Bioinformatics is important. So this is the ICT, cyber technology enabled discipline that is transforming the world. So informatics applied to bioresources would be bioinformatics. And the first line of application would be on genetics, data, DNA sequences. But it goes beyond that, because ultimately we will be able to make measurements through sensitive instruments of what compounds, small molecules or big molecules, are being produced by a plant, the leaf, the stem, the seed in culture, okay, through time. So imagine the amount of data that could be acquired, that could be obtained, say, in biotech in UP Los Baños as a basis for optimizing the growth and culture of that plant. Okay, this is the field of data science and data analytics. So where are we in the bioeconomy? And this includes marine and terrestrial. We're not very advanced in the development of our bioeconomy, unlike Singapore. Okay, Singapore is into high-tech biotech, principally pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, and partly because the multinationals located in Singapore, in A-Star, they provided the enabling environment by attracting, first and foremost, the most important factor or requirement for biotechnology, which would be the scientists, the high-level biotechnologists, the cell biologists, the molecular biologists, the biochemists, okay, the microbiologists, the pharmacologists as well. Okay, so now let's look again at what is happening in the Philippines. And this time we have players from the private sector. So some of you might know that we already have high-value aquaculture in Palawan. Okay. And this is not, led by the government or by the universities. Okay. We have one graduate of UP Los Baños. He's quite prominent. This is Dr. Ben Pecson. Okay, and he is the vocal advocate for the modernization of Philippine agriculture through his group called CAMP. Okay, and I think we all, including me, I argued in favor of BT Talong. But we have this major opportunity that is being pursued by our newly appointed national scientist, former UP President Emil Javier. So he is now a national scientist, and his award has been signed by the president. And he is telling me that we should still focus not just on coconut oil or not on coconut oil, but on coconut meal. What remains after you extract the oil is rich in macro and micronutrients. So that is what I would like to be involved in with UP Los Baños scientists. Okay? So we've heard some encouraging news that they're going to manage this coconut levy fund well. We have a new DA secretary. We may be moving forward on agriculture even more. Okay. Oh, this is a repeat. Then we have Indonesia as an example of how one can develop a textile or fabric industry. So how many of you have worn batik? Batik. Okay. Now, do we have something similar to batik? Do we have our own fabric like batik? We don't. Not really. So, in the case of Indonesia, the government decided to invest in the development of the batik industry, poured in a lot of money, okay, and created the market for it. Initially, by requiring government employees to wear batik fabric, not batik style of a cut of the dress or, no, the fabric itself, okay? And that is not possible if you do not have the mills. So in Indonesia, you have fiber and fabric spinning, okay? Modernized technology. Okay. On the other hand, in the Philippines, what do we have or what do we not have? Okay, we wear Filipiniana. We like the embroidery, okay? But are the fibers used for our fabrics Philippine? Are they spun and woven by us? Maybe some, but then our weavers are getting older and there are no new technologies for, the textile industry. And I'm very particular about, I love textile technology myself. Every time we travel abroad, we want to buy a batik. We want to go to Thailand and buy a Thai silk. We like to wear our Filipiniana. And yet, we don't really have a textile industry as of yet. Okay? And many of the fibers or the threads that we now use, even for Abel in the Ilocos, they are imported. Okay? They are imported from China. Okay? So, I think this is an area, opportunity for synergistic growth with our neighbors. You won't copy their batik, but on the other hand, our cultures allow us to have some similar patterns, right? Geometric patterns. But we could, get assistance from Indonesia how to develop our piña industry or other fabric industries. Malaysia, what is Malaysia known for? Malaysia's invested heavily in science and technology. And they give a lot of monetary awards to scientists who are able to publish in high-impact journals, international journals, because that is really the proxy for quality. So if you're able to publish by yourself or with foreign collaborators in a high-impact journal, okay, that means that you know the science well. And then you would be competent to pursue a technology that could be commercialized. So here you have Malaysia into all these kinds of technology. Of course, their mainstay is still the palm oil products. Okay, so those are the opportunities. Now let's hear the dampers, things that will unsettle us. We have to face the realities. You have to be unsettled about what's not going on in the ASEAN and what's not going on in the Philippines, despite the many good news that we hear. So we balance our pride, but we also be humble enough to accept that we're not yet there. Okay, so this is the UNESCO Science Report 2015, and I like to read this and quote this because, by and large, I think it would be objective. Okay, no conflicts of interest. Okay, so I showed this earlier, and UNESCO, which supports the ASEAN uh, completely, recognizes that we are, a common market. And this was like by the end of the year because it's 2015. Also recognizes that the region has defied predictions and is able to export high-tech products. Okay? But here, you'll see how ASEAN countries compare with Oceanian countries. So we're nowhere near Australia and New Zealand. But then you have Singapore, which is outstanding. It is GDP per individual, per capita. So that's 70 plus times 50 pesos. So you can imagine how much they earn on average. Versus the Philippines, it's within ballpark, $6,500 times 50 is about 300,000 pesos a year. Divided by 12 is about 27,000 pesos. Okay? I think we should be disturbed by these figures, okay, and not close our eyes. We have to stare it with eyes wide open and do something about it. So here is our growth of certain period and cumulative growth. So this is 2015 data of the UNESCO, okay? Okay? And then here you have encouraging news, affirmation of our opportunities for connectivity because we are great users of the internet and mobile phones. Therefore, we have interconnectivity, which is so critical for growth and development. It is a synergistic platform, as we say, okay? Growth in high-tech exports has been fastest in Cambodia and Vietnam. Exports have receded in the Philippines and Fiji. But that is like old data. So we take this with a grain of salt, okay? And say that now we're actually growing even in manufacturing. In fact, it's record growth. And I'll show that later. Now, this is the part that is also very disturbing. Trends in higher education in Southeast Asia and Oceania, and look at the Philippines. Okay? How much do we devote of our GDP to higher education? So, this has been our lifelong campaign to get more of our government JA to be invested in higher education and R&D. Philippines, 0.32, it says. Okay? All education, higher education is 0.32. Okay. Number of PhD students, look at us, 1:27. Whereas Malaysia and Singapore, 1/3 of education is on higher education. Okay, so that was the UNESCO report. And you can also read this. I didn't put the table anymore where it says there are only 78 PhDs per million population because it will be questioned by some of our officials. It's no longer accurate. It's a little bit more. It's over hundreds now, hundreds so. Okay. This is from the DTI and BOI. Okay, presentation of Secretary Rafaelita Aldaba, but it's also available, the DTI. Some of you may have read about the Global Innovation Index ranking of the Philippines. How many of you know about this? I mean, all of us, we kind of watch it because we're so low. So in 2017, we're like 73. Vietnam is 47. You know, Singapore is 7. Thailand is 51. Okay? 2017. And the analysis goes further. And we're one of the inner um, polygons, meaning very low. We're very low in institutions, creative outputs, knowledge and technology outputs, business sophistication, infrastructure, and human capital and research. Okay. Market sophistication as well. But the GII came out 2 or 3 weeks ago, 2019. Okay, that's the conceptual framework of the GII. Okay, is led by a guy who came from INSEAD. So it's not UNESCO. It is not UNESCO. Okay, and so it's as good, the analysis is as good as the authors of this analysis. And we have the scorecard for the Philippines, which we should compare with the scorecard of Thailand and the scorecard of Vietnam, because I think at this point we should not be comparing our scorecard with Singapore or Malaysia as basis for synergistic interactions with the ASEAN. On the other hand, if we follow what we tried to do in UP, under the one UP system, we had this idea that perhaps the bigger CUs could serve as bigger siblings of the smaller CUs and would have a way to pull them up. Okay, we also had lots of meetings where each CU would share an initiative that seems to work, and other CUs would adopt that initiative. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You're able to show that it works in your campus, then it's applied to the other campus with some iterations or changes. It's the same thing in the ASEAN. This kind of synergy works not just by actual interaction, but also by modeling, just by sharing the information freely, okay? Transparently. Actually, in the Global Innovation Index, we jumped 19 points. So we're now number 54. From 73, we're now number 54. Okay. And we all know that we have a vibrant economy that is producing more and better jobs. You may not feel it here in the city, but apparently it's felt well in the regions. And so when the Social Weather Station or other surveying groups try to get the information from the regions, using methods that are internationally accepted, because they are part of an international organization, then they're able to get the data showing that this thing is actually happening. And of course, we also have the data from labor and from NEDA. Okay. So the SDGs, the ASEAN goals are actually embedded in the Philippine Development Plan, but there are hurdles that we need to face. We want to create science, technology, innovation ecosystems, but we have a weak STI culture, still have low government spending for STI. This is the major problem: inadequate S&T human resources engaged in STI R&D. Okay. Difficulty in increasing employment opportunities and retaining S&T human capital. We are still working on our intellectual property policies and culture, although in the university, we already have many more filing for invention disclosures and filing for patent applications. very, very important is linkages with the other stakeholders or players in the STI ecosystem. That would be the LGUs, the SUCs, the NGOs, the communities, and the private sector, both the small and medium enterprises as well as the big companies, both national and international or foreign. Okay? Otherwise, where will our S&T graduates find their jobs? Okay, and not leave the country if you do not provide them viable, sustainable, you know, viable livelihoods, because there are sustainable enterprises. Okay? And this is what we have to watch out for. They can be both a boon and bane to the economy. Disruptive technologies will completely alter the way economic activities are conducted. Okay. While the ASEAN countries around us are already addressing this, we are always still thinking of ways to join the fire. What is jump into the fire? What is the fire? That's the fourth industrial revolution, and that is a revolution that will lead us to, use of artificial intelligence, deep machine learning, data science, and analytics. Okay. And everything will be affected by the Internet of Things. Everything will be affected by the market analysis that you unwittingly are, get when you use your cell phones if you're not careful. Okay. And information, they say, is the new fuel or the new oil. So who holds the information holds the power, the political, social, and economic power. Okay. So I think that we've got to step up in our capabilities to do science and technology through our basic, tertiary, and postgraduate education. In particular, we should be hosting short-term training, upgrading courses to address these new technologies. Okay? So I'm not sure if I flashed this earlier, but this is what I discussed in this talk. And I'm sorry that it's taken quite long, but on the other hand, if you want to think about it more deeply, you have to think of different levels of the problem or the challenges and opportunities. You have to think about this in a philosophical level, but you also have to think of it on the ground level, the to-do level. Okay? And if we just keep on talking about it, thinking about it, making schemes and diagrams about it, as is often the case, writing policies and thinking of implementation plans, but not having the manpower, the skilled manpower to implement the plans, they will not be implemented competently. Okay? That's been the case with many of our programs. So I'd like to thank you for your patience in listening to this presentation, and I'd like to acknowledge the sources, Secretary Pernia of the NEDA, Undersecretary Tita Aldaba of the DTI BOI, Dr. Edna Ko of UP United Nations Unistar CIFAL, and take a look at the UNESCO Science Report 2015, the Global Innovation Index Report of 2019, and the APASTI report of the ASEAN. Thank you.
Request you to sit down in front for a short question and answer. Ma'am, sa harap po. Thank you, Ma'am Giselle, for what you have shared with us. When an academician speaks, we get to hear from a scientist par excellence, cum excellent teacher. First, congratulations po on the patent application for the anti-cancer therapy. Second, I'm glad to hear of what Dr. Joel Coelho is doing in S&T sa contemporary in UPLB way back in the 1980s. And third, some notes of gratitude. Thank you for the challenge to UPOU for STI inculturation with the connectivity afforded by S&T. We do not know whether we could do this work of STI inculturation. Thank you also for giving us a positive outlook focusing on S&T. We always feel that as a country we are lagging behind, but the opportunities for synergies that you have identified in education, environment, health, and medicine gave us an encouragement as far as S&T is concerned. And thank you for balancing such outlook with where we are. We are low in bioeconomy and in some other aspects that we have heard presented that would unsettle and disturb us, but that would also challenge us, make us more excited to do work for the country some more. And we hope that that would help our future generation to contribute to the development of the S&T. The floor is now open for question and answer. Do we have questions from the web stream audience, or from the floor here at the HQ, at AVR? They are fascinated. Difficult to ask questions. When it comes to S&T, actually, if you are, maybe you're still thinking, I have that kind of question related to that, to how would I say that? When we talk about science, we put it at the ivory tower, ma'am, no? So siguro we cannot ask questions here. We are fascinated, awed with what science is doing, but at the same time, there's not much, how to say, there's a need to increase interest. If we're going to take the number of students taking ASEAN 281, ASEAN, S&T and ASEAN, that would tell us the interest in S&T. We have very few students taking the elective course in the ASEAN studies. Also at the higher education, for instance, marine science, and ma'am would know this better, are we attracting senior high school students to taking such courses? No, parang, yeah, we are surrounded by water. We believe that the ocean sciences would be there to help us develop in a sustainable manner, but there's so much promise in terms of growth. But if you look at the future generation, the interest to it, maybe I don't know where it lies. Maybe that's a question for ma'am at this point, while others are thinking of their questions.
So at MSI, we don't have an undergraduate marine science program. We only offer master's and PhD, including a PhD by research program. And we also have a professional master's for tropical marine ecosystems management. And we're happy to say that the enrollment has grown in the last few years. But I think that every high school and tertiary level student knows something about our marine resources, directly or indirectly, either as a fascination or fantasy, or because they live in coastal communities. And we must say that there are challenges to communicating interest and value in our marine resources by the education system, we have to adapt, revise the way we communicate, information and challenges that we face in developing our marine resources. And so in this UNESCO proposal, we are going to offer short and medium term training courses so that everyone interested, even those who are managing, marine resources at the LGU level could be trained. So we would have the training course that would suit the particular interested person, including administrators and public officials. So again, UPOU symbolizes this kind of thinking, bringing the classroom to the community. Okay? It's open walls, open borders. We have to be sensitive to the interests and the needs of our potential learners. But this is already starting, in particular in one part of the country. So in Bohol, we have the highest mollusk or snail biodiversity in the world. It's a mega diverse group. And many of our studies are conducted in this very popular place now called Panglao. Okay? But we've made inroads through a high school, grade school in Hagna, Bohol, which is run by scientists. Their names are Christopher and Victoria Bernido, Ramon Magsaysay awardees. Okay? And they are both physicists, theoretical physicists, but they made it their life mission and advocacy to teach our youth, and they've been highly successful. Many of their graduates are now able to pass the UPCAT and enter UP. But because they were focused mostly on physics, and the experiments in physics are quite simple, so they had this program, One Physics for the Nation. We thought maybe there would be an opportunity to teach them biology and biodiversity, marine biodiversity, by getting them interested in looking at the mollusks or the beautiful shells of the snails, including the conus snails, one of which already produced a drug that is used for intractable pain for cancer. So now these high school students, guided by their teachers, they're able to collect these snails and identify them taxonomically. And gradually we're teaching them together with my foreign-based collaborator, Dr. Baldomero Oliveira, who used his Howard Hughes Medical Institute grant for outreach to come up with materials and to support some teachers going to their high school. We're now also training them to do experiments, say to test for the effects on, on the nervous system or the muscular system. So it really matters that you start when you're young, and you try to do it nearby where you live or where you study. Okay, so that's as far as discovery is concerned. But on the other hand, even the training, the education on how to live well, live healthily, do physical exercise, not to eat too much, eat the right food. All those things start when you're young. And same thing with proper waste disposal and management. Reduced or controlled use of plastics that are now polluting our waters. That also starts when you're young. So some of us believe that you have to start from K1,
Okay.
K, the lower case, to get this thing into our system and culture. So the STI enculturation is through the education system, mainly. and it should start from youth. So this kind of advocacy program will take a long time. But on the other hand, we should not be linear or sequential in the way we address our problems. So while you're doing this and waiting for the education system to improve, you should be doing other things. The few scientists that we have that are good or are very dedicated should be able to produce some results, some product, some service from, from their research, okay, that would eventually be used by the public. And therefore, this would inspire more of our youth to pursue science. So we wonder why in the Philippines, not too many would like to take science courses, although we have seen a steady growth, impressive growth in science majors and engineering majors in some of our campuses like UP Diliman. Okay. Why is it that in other countries, they have enough science and engineering majors? We can learn from our neighbors in the ASEAN. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for giving us a concrete example of how that can be done from young until until the advanced studies level. Are there questions from the floor or from the web? Yes, Dean Prime. You can use the microphone at the middle.
Ma'am, you mentioned about compared to our neighbors, our R&D or output is lower compared to some of our ASEAN neighbors. And we also noted that the amount of money spent on R&D is lower in the Philippines compared to other countries. Since you have direct interaction with your colleagues in different parts of the region, is it just a matter of budget? Is it just a question of money? Or are there some things that they are doing that we might be also, that we could also adopt? No? Like for instance, are there differences in terms of how they prioritize research, in terms of the kinds of research that they do, in terms of the how close the industry and the R&D institutions or the university work together? Uh, Can we learn lessons from other countries? Because we all know that budget is very crucial to all of this, but there are also a lot of constraints considering that the country has a lot of needs, no,
Yeah.
to prioritize. So maybe in terms of the way they manage their R&D, could you share your insights on
Yes,
that?
yes. So I think this is almost like a lifelong advocacy for me as well. It's just to increase the number of experts, research experts in the country. Used to be that we would think of individual experts working by themselves, leading a research group. And so we would have groups working in silos and directly mentoring undergraduate, master's, and PhD students, and oftentimes sufficiently funded, um, maybe with lots of difficulties in procurement. So there is even inefficiency in the research process. But what's lacking in our system in the Philippines is a competent research group. So groups in the US, Europe, in Australia, and in the advanced Asian countries, they're the key. There is a hierarchy in the research group. So you have the principal investigator, who's probably a senior faculty who leads the group, who designs the research. Then there's junior faculty who is like the going to be the successor or the future leader of the group. And then there are postdoctoral fellows. So when you go to a lab abroad, you are a master's or PhD student, you are mentored, you are taught by the postdoctoral fellow. The PhD student is guided by the postdoctoral fellow, and then the master student is guided by the PhD student. So there is this kind of an assembly line that is in charge of mentoring the different levels of expert and competent people in the research group. Okay, that's one. And second, in research groups abroad, which are rich in, they are very, very rich in instruments, so scientific instruments. You have technical staff, okay? You have highly trained technicians who can perform experiments routinely, okay? They're not part of the design of the experiment, or they're not part of asking the questions or proposing the hypothesis or even writing the paper, but they do the experiments very well. Okay? So in the university, we are hoping to get the reps, the PS, the professional staff of reps, to include those highly technical instrument persons, okay, as professional staff. But do we have the items for them? We don't know. So there are elements, there are components of a research group that would make the group very productive. Okay? Now, nowadays, in universities, a very competent research group will not do everything within the group. They will always look for another research group in the university or elsewhere in another university to perform the experiments, and they cooperate, they collaborate. So it's really the principle of collaboration and synergy. Okay? So nowadays, you get publications that are very complex in nature. So each good publication has 5 components. Each component is performed by the experts in that field. And so you get multi-author publications as well. Okay. And that's natural because the understanding of the problem is deeper and broader. So you want to find a new drug for a disease, you must understand all aspects of the disease. You want to find a new variant, mutant of a crop, okay? Because it's a GMO, you want to see what the yields would be, the impacts, etc. You probably have to collaborate with the experts in those fields. So, so that's the second point. First is the internal structure of the research group. The second is the research group collaborations. There's a synergy. And I think the third is, yes, it's the amount of funding that one receives for the research, and afterwards, the evaluation of one's results. So, evaluation of the research starts at the proposal level. We may be identifying the right priorities, right? We know it. I mean, how can we go wrong? We have to advance in every major field of development, from food to health to environment to energy, to data management or connectivity and education as well. Okay? But I think it's so important that the proposals that originate from our scientists and research leaders be evaluated properly, prioritized, funded properly, and then when the results come out, they must also be evaluated properly. Now, if there is no transparency in the review, or there are not enough experts also in science administration, then you get into problems. Bottom line is, all of these problems originate or emanate from the dire dearth of S&T experts in the country. Yes. This is a major problem. And now you're saying, How can you incentivize our young ones to go to, take bachelor's degrees in undergrad, when afterwards, they will not earn a lot. They will not earn as much as, if they go to the call center, or if they go to the arts field, or become a medical doctor or a lawyer or a banker. See? Well, it's a virtuous, vicious chicken egg problem. It's a vicious cycle, and it's got to be broken. So how many of our brilliant young researchers went abroad, including from my own group, and I could not blame them or stop them. And I say, you go where your heart leads you, and then if you thrive there, I cannot blame you. You just have to make a good living. You have to be comfortable yourself, and then one day you can help us in other ways when you're more senior as a scientist there. What if they're so brilliant and they really want to address some important scientific questions? Why are you going to keep them from leaving if there are no opportunities here? So we say that the other important commitment of the government, which is already starting to do through the new Balik Scientist program of the DOST, would be to provide the incentives for them to come back afterwards, provide the jobs, provide the items in universities, and then promise them the research funding, seed money for them to start their research here. But then if you don't have a critical mass of scientists in the SUCs, as I said, there are no postdocs, there are no PhDs, there are no master's students. How can you perform your research all by yourself? It's a very, very serious problem. Very serious problem. I think so. So the ability to innovate and to come up with good, lasting solutions to our problems, that's highly dependent on the level of science and technology, the expertise of the scientists. And that is why the UNESCO and all of these international agencies will always correlate GERD, higher education expenditure, publications. They can correlate it directly with the innovation index and the economic development of the country. Okay, one example. You may say that you have a product that you develop that would be commercialized or can be commercialized. On the other hand, you have not published in that area of research. Okay, so how sure are you, or how sure are your the supervisors? How sure are you that that technology is really good if you've not passed, the test of fire, the crucible test, meaning your work in that field is not accepted by your peers in the international scientific community? I would have misgivings, right? And more often than not, it fails. So there's like a first, publicity that this thing is going to work, or this is commercialized technology. And then in the end, you don't hear about it anymore. You don't know what happened to it. Okay? And that's because nowadays, there's always this temptation to commercialize, right? To try to solve the problem in the locality or in the country. And that's, valid. But then I think it's the government's responsibility to make sure that we have many more competent, skilled, and expert scientists in this, business of, STI. Yeah.
Thank you, Ma'am Giselle. I think we should end with a challenge to the SNT community. And we really would like to thank Ma'am Giselle for coming over to Los Baños in spite of the inclement weather.
In Manila.
And it's
only.
in Manila, and it's a Friday. And as a token of our appreciation, we would like to call on our Dean, Dr. Primo Garcia, to give our token from UPOU, a certificate and something that would, ano ba yan? Yung palette mo, ma'am. Something for, maybe we can. Ma'am, it's a product. It's a product of UPOU. The wine is the Bignay wine.
You also have your own
Yes.
big wine.
We would like to thank everyone for coming over. Thank you, ICTDO, for the connectivity. We thank you, MC, for recording and the video recording of this event. This will be made available at the UPOU networks later on. We thank Donna and the FMDS for the legwork that has been provided to make this lecture series possible. Thank you, everyone, for Jen, who is a new student of ASEAN Studies. Thank you for coming over. Until the next ASEAN Studies lecture series, good afternoon, everyone.